before getting into the aspects and so that to set some context for all of the people here on the call, can you guys go ahead and describe Sehpathi? Divya, if you could describe Sehpathi, and Parth, if you could describe Tyron for us.
Sure.
Divya,
So tell you something about Project Sehpathi. Project Sehpathi essentially is a student-led initiative that Parth and I started back when we were in the 9th grade. And this project essentially was made to foster and develop seamless learning opportunities for the marginalized section of the society. So we essentially started working with a lot of kids. I'm really passionate about teaching. I come from a teaching background. Both my parents are doing something in the teaching field. So I think that's where I get it from. So, we would have a lot of classes, learning classes with these kids. And while working on this project, we sort of shifted our direction. We also started working with the members of the Lgbtqia community and the Aztec survivors. They too form a section in the marginalized community which is actually ignored by so many people. And it is one thing my mentor always told me, that the best way to empower somebody is either through education or making them financially independent. So what we actually started doing in Project Sehpathi was started getting people employed. And I think both of us have grown so much in that journey.
That's marvelous. Parth, if you could tell us about Tyron.
Right. So Tyron is basically a footwear brand, a fashion footwear brand, where we focus on sustainability. Right now, as we all know, that the term sustainability is being exploited a lot, and many brands today just focus on the aspect of fashion, but not its long-term consequences. And that is exactly what we stand for, and that is exactly what we are doing to improve on. And if you see, we are sustainable from both an environmental and a social point of view. Since we realized during the pandemic, the shoemakers, the cobblers, which are the heart, which are the soul of Tyron, really were not getting the opportunities that they used to get before the pandemic. They were really struggling with their jobs, and they also had to change their job profiles at that particular point of time. They had to do labor work for which they were not paid accordingly. And that is exactly why we took the step towards creating a difference and also helping them out during their time of need.
Understood. That sounds great. And you mentioned sustainability, and you talked about how it's widespread and overused, and not just in all smaller circles, but often, including so-called world leaders as well, exploit that context. Very few are really doing anything about it. And as two 16-year-olds, both of you have decided to act upon it. Okay. Can you guys tell me both of your motivations that went behind this?
People today believe in spending money on things that can serve a broader purpose and promise long-term benefits. The industry, as well as most consumers, are, however, still have the perception that popular brands are better than local brands. And most of us don't think about the long-term consequences of our shopping habits and how our actions have a direct impact on livelihoods and the health of our planet. This is exactly what motivated us to start a sustainable fashion brand, and so that at least we on our behalf can create a difference and influence the people around us, our family members, our friends, to change their shopping habits and move towards a sustainable future.
So you mentioned large brands there for a bit, and in general, all organizations, when it comes to, let's say, when they start and eventually when they get to a position, they all struggle with resourcing, especially when it comes to teams or having a sound supply chain, demand generation mechanism, etc. You decided to redefine the idea of resourcing itself, right? Because an organization like Tyron or Sehpathi rather would not exist without very efficient and targeted resourcing, taking care of it at the back end. How were both of you able to do it, and why did you choose to do this? Anybody can go first. D comes first. Divya, please go ahead.
Sure. So for us, resourcing sort of meant networking. Of course, the word resources means how you procure raw materials, but it's also about the people that you have in your team who sort of help you execute everything from scratch. And we sort of learned networking through Project Sehpathi. At this point, I would like to add that I've always have had my upbringing collectively in different places in Africa, Cape Town, Tanzania. And this is one phrase I've always heard growing up, is that if you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go far, go together. And I think this line has always stuck with me. So it has always been about people that I work with, right? Because a person is a person because of other people. And throughout our journey, it has been our mentors, Miss Vedika Saxena and Manpreet ma'am, and our teammates who have sort of aided us to make this business successful. I mean, we mean it when we say that if you have like the right people with you, it is easier for you to even do a difficult task. And this is exactly what happened with us in the case of resourcing. All people that worked with us, from cobblers to our mentors to our teammates, have played a crucial role in our journey.
And talking about resourcing of raw material, where do you get the tires from? How does it look like? How does that work? Procuring the tires itself, that's the first step, is what I'm guessing.
Right. So basically what we started with out was to search for places where we can find discarded tires easily. So there's this place in Ghaziabad which we found, which actually, it's basically a dump ground. So there were a lot of tire waste that is being dumped there. So that is where we got most of our tires initially. But now, since we have looked around, we have also collaborated with various mechanical shops. So they deal with punctured and discarded tires every single day.
True, yeah.
So that's where we have taken most of our tires from. And another co-founder of ours, which is Gurman, he and his family had a boutique. And during the pandemic, the whole business went down because there was no demand for it. And therefore, there we had a lot of decoratives that we can involve in our business. So that is where we resourced our decorative parts from. And that is what you see on most of our footwear. You can just go onto our website, www.tyron.in, and just check for yourself.
I'd request Jonan if you can just put the website link on the chat itself. People just go ahead, have a look at it after the conversation is over, because there's quite a lot of interesting stuff coming up. You talked about resourcing and getting the tires themselves, and we spoke about sustainability. Something else that is spoken a lot about and nearly as misused a word as sustainability itself is creating value as a business, right? As a business, you will hear in all of these talk shows or conversations that come up on YouTube, where every business claims to be creating value for each and everybody who's involved in it. But in truth, it's always been creating value for a very few handful who sit at the top. How are you creating value for your ecosystem? Tell me about how are the lives of the cobblers being changed, and the people who have been helping you guys design the thing in the first place. Tell me about that.
Exactly. Our ecosystem is not bound with just the environment. Our ecosystem also includes the people who work with us to build our products. The major tour de force behind Tyron are the cobblers, often exploited by retailers and wholesalers while battling socioeconomic realities. We did realize that these shoemakers are losing their livelihood during the pandemic, and it felt almost impossible for them to recover out of the misery. And because of that, many of them even turned towards other low-paying labor jobs. And this was a big motivation to us for us to start Tyron.
And I'd also like to add that at Tyron, we have made a conscious choice of addressing their issue, the issues of the cobblers. We have made certain that their ability and innovation are properly recognized and rewarded so that they are financially capable of developing a thriving community of their own. As a result, we follow the criteria for agreed upon fair trade norms. We have been assisting and partnering with small-scale cobblers and artisans who have lost their livelihood as a result of the pandemic. And currently, we are working with about 5 to 8 cobblers.
So as I understand, in the business of a cobbler who goes around and looks for work, isn't their income always very incidental? Has that changed as a result of association with Tyron?
Yes, it certainly have. Like, we have made sure that these cobblers get a base salary every month, regardless of the numbers of orders they complete with us. So this is something that we have made sure while working at Tyron.
That sounds absolutely great. And I can understand that the value is not just being allocated for anybody, rather it's distributed across the board itself. And most business entities, again, just like creating value, they're very uh, apprehensive about whether they are creating value or not. That's a completely different question. But in general, we have seen that most business entities are very hard pressed. They need to be forced a lot to provide any sort of transparency, any sort of governance. To put that into perspective, even the Vatican doesn't share its financials. What I'm talking about here is that you have no impositions by anyone else. You have no surface need, at least that I can see. And yet you have a board, you have financial statements, and you have a balance sheet. You have weekly marketing reviews as well, is what I understand. What was the need of all of this?
So as high school students, we have a lot in our plate when it comes to academics, and to manage a whole freaking business along with academics was a tedious task. Therefore, we had to keep a track of our finances and our investments because we had to be at pace with how our business was progressing. It was important to keep all of us on the same page. And I'd also like to say that we are just a bunch of teenagers who had a few thousand rupees in their pockets, which they sort of invested entirely in this project because it was, let's say, all of our pocket money that was involved in what we were doing. We were extremely serious about managing it well.
And to top it all, Shark Tank was a great encouragement for us. Seeing young businesses grow was a great incentive for us to work on our finances and see how our business is doing in general.
And I would definitely add one more thing is that I am a commerce student myself, and working on these financials sort of gave me a hands-on experience. And while we would be working on this, we would like show our balance sheets and everything to our parents, to our teachers and all, and they gave us like such amazing advice. So I think we sort of got the taste of like working in the corporate. So I think that was really exciting for both of us.
That's absolutely marvelous. And we, like we discussed in the earlier stages of this conversation, that Tyron is not your only effort at making an impact. And we discussed a little bit about Sehpathi. How did you guys manage something like Sehpathi, which is sharing online software skills? Sorry, soft skills online. How did you guys manage something like that during the pandemic?
So basically, when we started out, we did realize that the EWS students that we are trying to provide our sessions to did not have the adequate gadgets to attend our sessions during the pandemic. So that was the first step in our dictionary to provide them with the gadgets that they need for their studies. Because it was at a time we started our project in May or June, and by the time it was evident that the pandemic is going to be prolonged. So we did provide them with adequate gadgets. Like everyone has that one phone at their house, which they never use and it's just lying around. So we collected all of those smartphones and a few of our tablets also we gave out. And through that, they actually attended our sessions.
Divya, you wanted to add something to this?
It was more about giving them those skills, which, we are very fortunate enough to go to great schools where we are given training on soft skills and all. And we realized that at least in India, the education received by every child through the use of textbooks is literally the same. What sets apart an ordinary student from an extraordinary student is again the skill sets as part mentioned, right? So therefore, instead of focusing on academics, we sort of wanted to create a platform for students where they can learn where they can learn real world skills such as communication, spoken English, email writing, networking, and most importantly, being unique and creative. And that's why we had this small thing wherein we started helping those kids have their own social service projects. We started talking about how they could potentially bring a tangible change in their community. So I think that journey has just been so amazing for both of us, just working with them, learning. And it was a mutual skill exchange. We would learn so much from them and they would learn so much from us.
All of that just sounds so tremendous. And it's technically, from whatever I've heard till now, it's redefining being invested in an objective of a venture. Technically, it's redefining that for me, at least. Speaking of which, there are a lot of audience members here who are founders, partners of organizations. What should they take away from this? What do you think is needed so that more organizations set self-imposed high standards like yourselves?
First of all, I would like to thank each one of the members in the audience who are here today. I'm so glad you all came. And I would definitely like to say one thing, that we have learned a lot about leadership while working on our projects, and one thing that I definitely like people in this room to take away is that leadership isn't about taking charge. I mean, for me, leadership was always about taking charge. I think that's why I sort of wanted to be the class representative while I was growing up, but again, it just hit me while working in these projects that leadership isn't at all about just taking charge. I think leadership is about the ability to influence and motivate people around you. And also, leadership is about being a good team player. You cannot be a good leader if you aren't a good team player, right? Because at the end of the day, the people that you're working with should trust you and should be very open around you. And I think having the transparency and that free mindset while working in a group is something that can literally take an organization to a great level.
But another important thing that we learned through the course of our journey is that it's not important for any idea to be revolutionary or game-changing to work. As the old saying goes, winners don't do different things, they do the same things differently. And in the grand scheme of things, if you look at our business, we are just a footwear brand. But with our unique proposition of being sustainable from both an environmental and social point of view, it makes a lot of sense for an aware consumer to shift to our product and the vision it carries with it. Therefore, for a business, it is important to have a unique standpoint for its product or service that can compete with the competition and just not be a subset of it.
True. That's true. Thank you so much, guys. I would now like to introduce our next panel member, Ms. Nooraine Fazal, co-founder and CEO Inventure Academy. With a Master's of Science degree in Management from Boston, she has worked with IBM and Reuters in the frontline and in several management capacities. She returned to India in 2003 after spending 12 years across UK, US, Australia, Greater China region to be a citizen with a say in the way India was developing. Nooraine believes education is a lifelong journey and that every child should have access to equal education. With this principle at core, she started Inventure 17 years ago to help learners realize their full potential and be socially responsible as citizens who can excel anywhere in the world. She is a contributor to the Sunday Guardian and Education World and has received multiple awards and accolades, such as 50 Leaders Who Can Revive the Indian Education Award 2020, Women Empowerment Principles Leadership Awards 2019 and 20, and Future 50 Leaders Shaping Success Award by 2019 by the Fortune magazine. Hi, Nooraine, good afternoon. It's absolutely marvelous to have you here with us.
Good afternoon, and thank you. I think one thing which you didn't mention was that EQUITOR worked with us when I came back to India, and co-founders and myself were looking at opportunities in education. So you're very much a part of our journey.
Let's keep the ball rolling and get right into the conversation after the fascinating session that we had earlier with Divya and Parth. Something that stayed back from that conversation is that their trigger point did not come from the education system. Aren't pivotal points like these why you started Inventure in your nearly 2 decades of experience? How would you say we can become a nation of Divyas and Parths?
Okay, thank you for the question, and congratulations to Divya and Parth and for bringing them to this platform. My view is really that the education system it's not independent of the society or the community that we live in. So if I look at my own journey, I always wanted, right since I can ever remember, I wanted to be a positive change maker. I wanted to create something. I wanted to be a leader. And if I look at what drivers and what exposures I had, it was across the board. I grew up in a house where my mother was a social worker and who became a politician. My father was a business person. My grandparents were very involved in the community that they were part of in terms of really trying to enhance development in the community. I went to Christian schools right through it. There's a tremendous focus in schools for taking responsibility for your action, for being better people, and just to impact the world around you in a more positive way. In college, I really maximized my learning outside the classroom because a lot of what was being taught in the classroom, I think Divya mentioned about textbooks, it was all just about memorizing. It was in the textbook, or a teacher just called out notes and you went for one exam at the end of the year. And that's what the entire education was all about. But I was fortunate. I had a benefit of a principal, her name is Sister Genevieve. Those of you who are familiar with Mount Carmel's may know the name. But she let me pursue sports. I played about 6 hours of sports every day. I organized a range of cultural events for the college. In fact, I went back to college and I find that the cycle stand that we built through the proceeds of one of the of a music show that we had organized is still standing there. I then went overseas, as you said, to pursue my master's in business. And that's when it struck me that education can actually be very different. So if I look at my marketing class when I was doing my Bachelor's of Commerce in Mounts, the questions asked were really largely theory. So what are the 4 P's of marketing? Whereas while at Boston University, it was a case study approach. I actually did market research for a shampoo company. I did market research for IBM, where I did my internship. So really, I think we can't expect the education system to be everything for us and for schools to do everything for us. And we really need to reflect as a society in terms of what we see as the purpose of education, what we see as the purpose of life even. And I really liked what Parth said. And I think for me and for us at Inventure, the purpose of life is really to be the best that you possibly can be and to contribute to making the world a better place. And education, therefore, should help students, help children find that sweet spot. What do they enjoy doing? What do they like to do? What are they good at? What does the world need? And what can they earn a productive livelihood from? So what really needs to change? I think the recognition that the new world needs new learning. Change is the only constant. So we should be teaching children, as Divya and Parth said, we should be teaching life skills. We should be teaching children to be innovative, to be adaptive, to be agile, to learn and to be learners for life. These are very critical for not just survival, not just for excellence, but just for survival. And we as educators and parents need to walk that talk. Industry needs to walk that talk. Second, I would say, is the belief in every child, that every child can learn and deserves a shot at achieving their potential. 3, opportunities. I certainly know schools that provide the kind of opportunities that Parth and Divya have found outside of school. And really opportunities to help children figure out what they're good at and what they like to do, and also to be positive change makers and to be more entrepreneurial about life. I think that's very critical because, as we're seeing with COVID, life is not about finding answers to questions that you already know, right? You need to go way beyond that. And 4th is what Sister Genevieve did for me was Divya kept, she kept mentioning her mentor repeatedly. We can't leave this to chance. We need a more formal system where we have success coaches, we have well-being coaches. I think the world that the children are growing up in today, in many ways, they have tremendous opportunity. They have more opportunity than we ever did, but they also have far more challenges and influences. And I think that they don't necessarily have the maturity to deal with it. And finally, I would say more collaboration. I think a lot of times education institutions expect children to come in kindergarten and graduate in high school and college, but we need far more collaboration. Students, parents, teachers need more voice, they need more choice, and they need to participate as equal stakeholders in designing the ecosystem and in line with the philosophy of the school, of course. So I think these are some of the changes we need to create more, Parths and Divyas.
That sounds tremendous. And you talked about collaboration and all of the other pointers that you discussed. They all seem to be heading towards a whole-brained approach of education, something that Inventure has become a beacon of. And what I understand is an approach like that must have an enormous ripple effect across ecosystems, across each and every individual that Divya and Parth, for example, will interact with. Can you please tell us the impact of one child being exposed to an education of this nature and then the ripple effect downstream?
Sure, I can actually give you multiple examples, but I'll go with one, a student I just met last week when I was visiting New York. His name is Veer Menon. He came to Inventure in grade 8. His dream was to represent India in the Olympics, Tokyo Olympics. We know what happened to Tokyo Olympics, right? So yeah, his dreams kind of got derailed, but let me talk about him at school. He participated in our Safety, Our Voice student committee, a charter committee. I don't know how many of you remember the time where Bangalore schools were considered as the unsafest place on planet Earth, literally. Everybody had a view on what the solution was, the chief minister, the corporate chieftains, of course, the nation wants to know, there was a lot of stuff being said in the media. Nobody actually asked children what they thought. So we had a committee of 8 students, Veer was one of them. And we spoke to 1,100 students across the socioeconomic spectrum. There were kids from government schools, from free of charge private schools, from international schools, from public schools. And we asked them, what would make you feel safer? And where do you feel safe? And, is it at school? Is it at home? Is it outside? And based on that, we presented our findings to the Karnataka government and UNICEF. 3 years later, that then became contributed towards the formation of the Karnataka Child Protection Policy. Karnataka is the first state in India to actually have a policy. Veer went on to study history and international relations because he was influenced by one child in particular who said that he would feel safer if his parents didn't sell him like they sold his brother. Fast forward, Veer is now doing masters in cybersecurity at New York University. His aspirations of representing India at the Olympics, unfortunately, were dashed because of COVID. He was not able to make that journey from the US to Oman, where qualifying was taking place. So I asked if he was going to give it another shot for the following Olympics. He said, we'll see, because it is expensive. But for now, I'm really happy with what I'm doing because I'm pursuing cybersecurity, which I think is very critical. And the takeaway for me was that when I look back to his time at Inventure, and particularly with the Our Safety, Our Voice committee, the kids learned so much. They learned to understand other people's perspectives. They learned how to ask questions. They learned how to process that information. They learned how to ask for stuff. They learned how to handle success, failure. These are very essential life skills. So I think, in their time, Parth and Divya will probably have other ideas, that have other passions, but there's some things which they will hold core to them. But I really do believe the education system needs to focus far more on providing these kind of learning opportunities to students so that they can make the pivots which are required and really make the best of the opportunities and challenges that they could experience in the 21st century.
True. I can understand that the contribution of the education system towards the nation is something that we are having a conversation about right now. If we have a look at all the things that contribute to that, let's talk about natural resources, technology, there's capital, and then obviously there's manpower. When we look at all of these 4, we seem to be doing quite fine for the first 3 in the terms of economic growth towards the country, but quite a lot far behind on the last one. To put that into context, there's a country called Eswatini that ranks higher than India in the terms of quality of education system. In your opinion and in your experience, what part do you think the education system needs to play in the growth of the Indian economy?
Well, really everything. But it needs to start with us having a vision for India. What is our vision? I know what the target for GDP growth for India is, but I don't actually know what the vision we have as a nation. What is our idea of India by 2030, by 2050? And I think whatever that vision might be, it needs to recognize that every human being wants a sense of purpose, wants a sense of identity, and wants to feel valued. Once we set that vision, we need to figure out what the purpose of education is and what role is education going to play in this. So for example, when we say, let's say we say sabka saath, sabka vikas, sabka saath, right? That needs to happen at school. You need to create a curriculum which enables it. You need to create a culture which enables it. And if you look at GDP growth, I understand the target for India is somewhere around about 8 point something trillion by 2030.
Yeah.
But most of that is really forecasted to be driven by domestic consumption. We're just not creating enough jobs. I think 1991, which is when I graduated, to 2013, there was a shortfall of about 70 million jobs in the economy. So we really need an education system which creates more change makers, which creates more entrepreneurs, and also teaches us to be more entrepreneurial about life. And that's why I shared the example of Veer Menon, a student, for example. And it's also a case of we need to figure out where, in terms of the sectorial, I can see that there's a dip in agriculture right now. People are moving from rural India to urban India. Everyone's basically chasing the same jobs in the service sector. But what about food security in that case? Industries, we're seeing a fall in the number of people who are working in manufacturing. But you look at China, the success story has really been fueled by manufacturing. Whereas in India, we're employing half the number of people, I understand, since the start of the pandemic, or rather in 2020, the start of the pandemic, relative to where we were in 2016. So I think we're really headed for disaster if we don't come up with an inclusive, enabling vision and really put our money where our mouth is. I was very happy to see that we came up with a new education policy after 30 plus years. And it talks about a more holistic education, but we're seeing, the recommendation was that 6% of GDP should be contributed towards education. Based on my calculations, based on my experience, even if you invest just 50,000 a year on each child's education, you need 10 times that to be invested.
We have set a target for 2030, but we're not really looking into how or what exactly, and we're all banking it all on the service sector. And like you had mentioned this to me in a conversation earlier, not all of us can work in the service sector, which is absolutely sounds very true. That sounds so fascinating to me. And let's try and summarize our conversation for today. I would like to first thank Divya and Parth for taking the time out. It really boggles my mind on how both of you find the time to juggle the elements on your plate while excelling at all of them. I truly appreciate and thank Nooraine for her time, especially since we trespassed on her well-earned vacation during the past couple of days. Sincerest apologies for that. Inventure truly has become just a quick glimpse at the website tells you that Inventure truly has already become an inspiration and has become an easy destination for all parents who wish to see their children realize their full potential and excel anywhere in the world. Coming back to Divya and Parth, I'd like to start that section of our closing by asking a very simple question. What were you doing when you were 16? The only thing that I made of myself when I was 16 was a fool. In a world where we have businesses, big and small, all of them still stuck worrying about resourcing and proof of concepts, both of these individuals have already gone ahead and created a board, conduct weekly review meetings, and have a balance sheet. When I wake up in the morning, I'm thinking about Instagram and what's new on Netflix, not about the soft skills of the LGBTQI community. And it is a thought process like that, and drivers like employment creates personal empowerment. Stuff like that is what causes real shift. If we look at large companies, when it comes to the word sustainability, they are more often than not, they have only gone as far as recycling their own products. And here we have a team who are solving one ecological problem, fashion industry being the third largest polluter, with another ecological problem, tires being the biggest contributor to landfills. In terms of creating value, we talked about that as well earlier, where the world is placing earnings for top shareholders as the KPIs for CEOs. Here are two individuals who are helping people shift from their incidental only income to an assured monthly income. And in the last 2 decades, we at EQUITOR have had the privilege of working with nearly 150 business leaders. And the best business performance stories that we saw were always the ones that set the highest of standards for themselves, irrespective of their size, their environment, challenges presented to them. And this is a characteristic that is clearly demonstrated by Tyron already. We have been able to help teams who had such self-imposed high standards like that of Tyron extract more from their organization. And this is done by something very simple: finding out biggest strengths and then building a strong business model around the same. And this principle has resulted in unlocking nearly $6 billion in additional shareholder value. And that is the major reason why Tyron is a part of this conversation today. And that is why EQUITOR believes that Divya and Parth's futures are much brighter than what is currently perceived, because they are playing to their strengths. That was about them. We also had a very profound conversation with Nooraine where we discussed about the education sector in general. What I take away from that is, when we come to the education sector, from what Nooraine said, we may be behind in the global ranking, but we are far from being outdated. The only question that remains is more of an evolution. Nearly every education system places science and math at the top, followed by commerce, stuff like environmental science, arts, etc. at the bottom. The hierarchy, as defined by Peter Diamandis in his book Abundance, exists because the system was designed in the 19th century during the Industrial Revolution, because at that point in time, that hierarchy provided the best chance of success. And like Nooraine mentioned, the metrics of success itself need to change. And until that design doesn't tap into the trigger points of the Divyas and Parths and the strengths of those students, Divyas and Parths of the nation would always remain largely an uncommon example. And like Nooraine correctly mentioned, this shift doesn't need to just happen inside schools. It has to first happen inside the societies that we live in. As a result, then extended inside of the schools. We at EQUITOR will keep all of you informed of the amazing milestones that Divya, Parth, and Inventure set one after the other. I would request all of our audience members. I understand that there has been some technical issues, which is why individuals without Zoom IDs haven't been able to join us. We'll make sure to share the YouTube video with all of them. I would request all members present here to comment on LinkedIn and share with us what they thought about the session today. Also, please go ahead to Tyron's website, LinkedIn pages of Divya, Parth, and Nooraine. There's some amazing stuff happening over there. And with that, thank you all for your time. See you at the next iteration of Northstar. Please have a pleasant weekend ahead.